Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Happy Friday, everybody. I hope you had a productive week, and I wish you all a restful weekend ahead. Let's begin with the economy. According to recently published interim reports, Chinese banks are under strain as their deposits shrink in the wave of a regulatory crackdown on offering deposit rates higher than regulatory caps. In the first half of the year, many Chinese mainland-listed commercial banks saw a decline in their net cash flow generated from operating activities, a key indicator of lenders' liquidity. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes that among China's so-called Big Six state-owned banks by assets, only Postal Savings Bank of China Co. Limited managed to keep the gauge positive at about 131 billion yuan, $18.4 billion for the period, with a year-on-year increase. Industrial and Commercial Bank of China Limited, the largest of the Big Six, reported the biggest drop of nearly 1.3 trillion yuan to approximately 27 billion yuan, blaming a decline on client deposits. Agricultural Bank of China Limited and China Construction Bank Corp posted year-on-year decreases of nearly 1.1 trillion yuan and more than 500 billion yuan, respectively. Caixin writes that industry insiders attributed the worsening cash flows to shrinking deposits. Quote, "One of the main contributors to this is the government's moves to stamp out the practice of lenders ignoring regulatory caps to offer preferential deposit interest rates or adding interest manually to final interest payments upon maturity." End quote. The clampdown was part of a regulatory effort to arrest the slide in banks' net interest margin. The key profitability metric for lenders hit a 13-year low at 1.54% in the first quarter. The reading was below the warning threshold of 1.8% set by the industry group to ensure banks can maintain reasonable profitability. Quote, "Banks have been purposefully offloading deposits with relatively high interest rates to reduce costs and stop their NIM from sliding further," industry insiders told Caixin. End quote. Another factor contributing to the decline in deposits, the outlet writes, is the recovery of the wealth management market in the first half of the year, driven by a bond bull run, which caused some personal savings to shift to wealth management products. Multiple industry insiders warned Caixin that lenders could face liquidity issues if their net operating cash flows continue to decline. Meanwhile, policymakers have a lot on their plate because, along with banks, they are still facing a stubborn property market refusing to recover. Back in May, Beijing encouraged over 200 local governments to purchase unsold homes to address an oversupply issue. However, more than 3 months later, only 29 cities have acted on this directive. The limited success so far suggests the need for stronger measures to tackle the 382 million square meters of excess inventory, an area roughly the size of Detroit. Ding Zuyu, chairman of Shanghai CRIC Information Tech Co., this week observed that local governments have made little progress, with only 1.9% of unsold apartments purchased nationwide by July. Local officials are balancing Beijing's demands with the need to manage costs carefully. For many, buying apartments now doesn't make financial sense, especially since prices are expected to drop by at least another 30% in major cities before stabilizing, according to Jefferies Financial Corp. Inc. Analysts point out that the expected returns from converting these homes into affordable housing are lower than the costs involved too. According to a recent Macquarie Group Limited report, in China's top-tier cities, rental yields in 2023 averaged just 1.4%, compared to the central bank's funding rate to buy these properties of 1.75%. So buying up these homes would just end up being a big unproductive debt on local government balance sheets, at a time when local government fiscal health is already very poor. Only Shanghai, among the 31 provinces and municipalities, posted a fiscal surplus in the first half of this year. Fitch Ratings recently estimated that 1 to 5 trillion yuan, $700 billion, is needed to address the supply-demand imbalances in the housing sector. For local governments to step in, this would be a tremendous weight on their already strained balance sheets, and for what could end up being highly unproductive assets. US-based Bloomberg writes this week that a few local governments have proposed heavily bargaining to minimize risks, but this raises concerns about whether developers in financial distress would agree to sell. For example, Foshan City in Guangdong Province, a very wealthy part of the country, proposed buying homes at no more than 50% of nearby project prices, while Dongguan City, also very wealthy, plans to price affordable housing even lower. This is very telling if local governments themselves, who are trying to keep home prices high and spark confidence for buying in the market themselves, only believe these properties are worth less than 50% of their advertised value. Now, if local governments were able to buy these properties at heavily discounted prices, it's good for local governments, but risks wiping out already shaky developers and risks putting downward pressure on prices. Both things policymakers wish to avoid. Hot potato, musical chairs, pick your metaphor. The cost of the chronic oversupply of homes and the resulting bubble will need to be placed on someone. As this is one system, while weight can be taken off one area of the economy, it must be placed on another. As songwriters The Band wrote in their classic The Weight, take a load off Fanny, take a load for free, take a load off Fanny, and you put the load right on me. Or, to quote US economist Thomas Sowell, there are often no solutions, only trade-offs. Next up, trade, technology, and Taiwan. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing, as always, are the only ways in which the channel can grow and be shown to new people. It's a tremendous help for me. So if you do like what I'm trying to do here and you'd like to see the channel continue doing that, this would be a huge help, a big favor if you could hit the like button, subscribe, and share. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. It is just me making these episodes 6 days a week, and I rely primarily on subscriber support to stay financially sustainable. Thank you so much. Next up, in an exclusive report published today, UK-based The Financial Times writes, citing several unnamed sources, that SEAL Team 6, the secretive US Navy unit known for killing Osama bin Laden in 2011, has been preparing for potential missions to support Taiwan in the event of a PRC invasion. This elite special forces group, which handles some of the military's most critical and complex tasks, has been training for over a year at its base in Dam Neck, Virginia Beach, about 250 kilometers southeast of Washington, D.C., specifically for a potential conflict involving Taiwan. This covert training highlights the growing U.S. focus on deterring a Chinese attack on Taiwan and preparing for such a scenario. These efforts have intensified since 2021 when Phil Davison, the then U.S. Indo-Pacific commander, warned that China might attempt an invasion of Taiwan within 6 years. SEAL Team 6 is one of the most elite forces in the U.S. military, alongside the Army's Delta Force, and operates under the Joint Special Operations Command. The Financial Times writes that in recent years, the Pentagon has deployed more regular special forces to Taiwan for training missions with the Taiwanese military. However, the activities of SEAL Team 6 are far more sensitive, given the classified nature of its operations. As the threat from terrorist groups has diminished, U.S. Special Operations Forces have shifted focus, aligning with the broader military and intelligence community's increased emphasis on China. CIA Director Bill Burns recently revealed that 20% of the agency's budget is now directed to China, a 200% increase over 3 years. As regular viewers know, tensions across the Taiwan Strait have heated up in recent years, with the PRC greatly increasing its military flyovers, drills around the island, and threats against its government. Beijing accuses Washington of provoking the tensions by getting too close to Taiwan, and Taipei too, especially since the democratic election of William Lai Ching-te, who they have labeled as a separatist. The US has replied that it has only moved closer to Taipei in response to Beijing's own aggressive actions, not just around Taiwan, but in the wider region. The US, under the Taiwan Relations Act, is obligated to help Taiwan defend itself, though it has long maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity, not explicitly stating whether it would defend Taiwan in the event of an attack. The same region has seen Japan also move much closer to Taipei and strengthen its own military preparedness. This has accelerated especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Beijing's moving closer to Moscow. Thus, the 3 largest economies in the world are pouring military resources into a critically important region. It is a very tense and deeply dangerous state of affairs. Now, let's end with EU-China technology and trade. This is a development to supplement yesterday's coverage of the relationship. Let's begin with a quote from veteran China analyst Bill Bishop, who observed today, quote, One of the suggested solutions to the impasse over EU tariffs on PRC EVs is that the EU should copy the model the PRC used when it was building its car industry and allow PRC EV firms to set up factories in the EU if they take a JV, joint venture, partner and agree to transfer technology. But Bloomberg reports that the Ministry of Commerce has already warned PRC EV firms to keep core EV technology in China and only export knock-down kits that can be put together in a foreign factory. End quote. It's reported too that China's Ministry of Commerce held a meeting in July with more than a dozen automakers who were also told they shouldn't make any auto-related investments in India, in another attempt to safeguard the know-how of China's EV industry and mitigate regulatory risks. Chan Jinzhu, chief executive of Shanghai Minliang Auto Service, a consultancy, told Hong Kong-based the South China Morning Post, quote, "The instructions by the ministry are interpreted as a warning to the companies since they are now actively looking to raise manufacturing capacity in markets such as Southeast Asia and some European countries. It may cause some of the companies to slow down their overseas plant building pace." End quote. According to the Bloomberg report that Bishop just referred to, quote, "During the meeting, the minister noted that the countries inviting Chinese automakers to build factories are usually those enacting or considering trade barriers against Chinese vehicles. Officials told attendees that manufacturers shouldn't blindly follow trends or believe such calls for investment from foreign governments." End quote. One commentator sardonically observed that such advice should have been given to Western businesses interacting with China over the last 20 years. Indeed, as Bishop just observed, Beijing does not want the Europeans to use the exact method of technology transfer which Beijing forced on European companies and which helped China move up the value chain over the last 2 decades. In the Bloomberg report, for example, the Chinese officials said that the companies that had put up trade barriers wanted the technology transfers. However, the Chinese also used trade barriers to force technology transfers on the Europeans and others. None of this will likely impress European officials and negotiators as the trade disputes between the two blocs drag on. And speaking of these disputes, yesterday, Thursday, the European Commission announced that it had rejected proposals made by China to set minimum prices or volume caps on imports of electric vehicles into the EU. US-based Politico writes that, quote, "The decision deals a blow to Beijing's desperate efforts to reach a negotiated solution with the EU to avoid imposing of heavy duties on made-in-China EVs after the bloc identified a sweeping subsidy program ranging from refining lithium to shipping the cars abroad." End quote. In a final attempt to sway the EU, China's Minister of Commerce, Wang Wentao, will meet the bloc's trade chief, Valdis Dombrovskis, on September 19th, next week. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Friday, have a great weekend, a restful weekend, and I will see you all tomorrow.